On the night of February 24th, 1978, 5 men's lives would mysteriously and unexplainably change forever. Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, Ted Wire, Jack Madruga would all be found dead. The 5th, Gary Mathias, would forever go missing. The Yuba County Five, referred to as the Boys quite often, were young men from Yuba City, California. Some with mild intellectual disabilities and one with schizophrenia with sometimes violent tendencies, who attended a college basketball game at California State University, Chico, that fateful night. The 5 men's favorite activity was sports. Their families said that when they got together, it was usually to play a game or to watch one. They played basketball together on a team called the Gateway Gators. This team was supported by a local program for people with mental disabilities. On February 25th, the night after the incident, the Gators were due to play their first game in a week-long tournament sponsored by the Special Olympics, for which the winners would get a free week in Los Angeles. The 5 men had prepared the night before, some even laying out their uniforms and asking their parents to wake them up on time. They decided to drive to Chico that night to cheer on the UC Davis basketball team in an away game against Chico State. Madruga, the only member of the group besides Mathias who had a driver's license, drove the group 50 miles north to Chico in his turquoise and white 1969 Mercury Montego. When the basketball game ended at the California State University at Chico, the young men from 50 miles to the south climbed into Madruga's Mercury Montego and drove out of the parking lot. Their team had won, which not surprisingly had them in great spirits. They were more excited than ever for their upcoming game the next night. Wire had asked his mother to wash his new white high-top sneakers for the tournament. Mathias had just about driven his mother crazy with the game. "We got a big game Saturday," Mathias kept saying. "Don't you let me oversleep." They stopped 3 blocks away at Bears Market, annoying the clerk who was trying to close up, and bought a various assortment of snacks and candy, as well as some milk. None of the men were ever seen alive again after that point. Ted Wire's mother woke up around 5 a.m. that morning, not knowing that would be her very last night of solid sleep. Ted's bed was empty. She quickly called the other mothers of the boys, finding out that none of them had come home the night before. All 5 friends had vanished. At 8 o'clock that evening, Mrs. Madruga called the police. Saturday came and went, and no word came. The police then began to take interest. Police in Butte and Yuba counties began searching along the route the men took to Chico and found no sign of them. However, a few days later, a Plumas National Forest ranger told investigators that he had seen the Montego parked along Oroville Quincy Road in the forest on February 25th. At the time, he hadn't considered it significant, since many residents often drove up that road into the Sierra Nevada on winter weekends to go cross-country skiing on the extensive trail system. But after he read the missing persons bulletin, he recognized the car and led the deputies to it on February 28th. They found Madruga's Mercury 70 miles from Chico on a deserted and rut-ravaged mountain road. And from that day on, nothing they found, nothing anybody told them, ever seemed to make any sense. Inside the car was evidence suggesting the men had been inside it between when they were last seen and when it was abandoned. The wrappers and empty cartons and cans they had purchased in Chico were present, along with programs from the basketball game they had watched and a neatly folded road map of California. However, the discovery of the car raised more questions than it answered. It had stopped at the snow line, and although its tires had apparently spun, the car was not really stuck. 5 men could have easily pushed it free. The gas tank was a quarter full, the keys were gone, but when the police hotwired the car, the engine started immediately. The car's underside had no damage at all. This heavy American car with a low-hanging muffler and presumably with 5 full-grown men inside had wound up at a stretch of bumpy, treacherous mountain road in total darkness without any sign at all of a gouge or a dent, not even a stain, not even a small scratch to show for it. The driver had either used astonishing care and precision, or they knew the road well enough to anticipate every rut. According to the boy's family, only Madruga drove that car, and the family say Madruga, who hated camping and also the cold, did not know that road at all. As far as anyone related to the case knows, none of the boys knew the road. Police could not figure out why the men had abandoned the car, or a reason why anyone would ever do such a thing in that situation, unless foul play was involved. A storm blew in the day the car was found, dropping 9 inches of snow on the upper mountain. 2 days later, after searchers and snowcats nearly became lost themselves, further search efforts were called off due to continuing bad weather. No trace of the men was found other than the car. In response to local media coverage of the case, police received several reports of some or all of the men being sighted after they had left Chico, including some reports of them being seen elsewhere in California or the country. Most of the reports were easily dismissed, as is the case usually here, but 2 of the sightings stood out. Joseph Shones of Sacramento told police he had inadvertently wound up spending the night of February 24th through the 25th near where the Montego was found. He had driven up there where he had a cabin to check the snowpack in advance of a weekend ski trip with his family. At 5:30 p.m., about 150 feet up the road, he too had gotten stuck in the snow. In the process of trying to free it, he realized he was beginning to experience the early symptoms of a heart attack and went back in, keeping the engine running to provide him heat. Around 6 hours later, lying in the car and experiencing severe pain, he saw headlights coming up behind him. Looking out, he saw a car parked behind him, headlights on, with a group of people around it. One of whom seemed to him to be a woman holding a baby. He called to them for help, but they stopped talking, turned their headlights out. Later, he saw more lights behind him, this time flashlights, that also went out when he called to them. After that, Shones said at first he recalled a pickup truck parking about 20 feet behind him briefly, and then continuing on down the road. Later, he clarified to police that he couldn't be sure of this, since at that point in time he was almost delirious from the pain he was in. After his car ran out of gas in the early morning hours, his pain subsided enough for him to walk 8 miles down the road to a lodge where the manager drove him back home, passing the abandoned Montego at the point where he had recalled hearing the voices originate from. His doctors later confirmed that he had indeed experienced a mild heart attack. Now, it should be said that hallucinations are not typically a symptom of heart attacks nor a way of telling if you've had one. However, one can't dismiss the possibility of him panicking to the point of delirium or seeing and hearing things that weren't there due to the sheer amount of pain he was experiencing. Skepticism aside, Wire's mother said ignoring someone's pleas for help was not like her son at all. She recalled how he and Sterling once had helped someone they knew get to the hospital after overdosing on Valium, this not at all being an isolated incident of them being very helpful people. The other notable report was from a woman who worked at a store in the small town of Brownsville, 30 miles from the point where the car had been abandoned, which they would have reached had they continued down the road from where the car had been found. On March 3rd, the woman, who saw the flyers that had been distributed with the men's pictures and information about the $1,200 reward the families have put up, told deputies that 4 of them had stopped at the store in a red pickup truck 2 days after the disappearance, and the store owner corroborated her account. The woman said she immediately realized that the men were not from the area because of their, quote, big eyes and facial expressions, end quote. 2 of the men, whom she identified as Hewitt and Sterling, were in a telephone booth outside the store, while the other 2 went inside. The police said she was a credible witness and they took her account seriously. However, this would not make or break the case in any way, shape, or form. On June 4th, With most of the higher elevation snow melted, a group of motorcyclists went to a trailer maintained by the Forest Service at a campsite off the road about 19.5 miles from where the Montego had been found. The front window of the trailer had been broken. When they opened the door, they were overwhelmed by the odor of what turned out to be a decaying body inside. That body was later identified as Weyers. The day after Weyers' body was discovered, searchers found the remains of Madruga and Sterling. They lay on opposite sides of the road to the trailer, 11.5 miles from the car. Madruga had been partially eaten by animals and dragged about 10 feet to a stream. He lay face up, his right hand curled around his watch. Sterling was in a wooded area, scattered over about 50 feet. There was nothing left of him but bones. Autopsies showed that they both died of hypothermia. Deputies think that one of them may have given in to the need to sleep that comes within the last stages of hypothermia, while the other stayed by his side and eventually died the same way. 2 days later, as part of one of the search parties, Jack Hewitt's father found his own son's backbone under a bush 2 miles northeast of the trailer. His shoes and jeans nearby helped identify the body. The next day, a deputy sheriff found a skull downhill from the bush, 300 feet away, confirmed by dental records later to have been Hewitt's. His death, too, was attributed to hypothermia. In an area to the northwest of the trailer, roughly a quarter mile from it, searchers found 3 Forest Service blankets and a rusted flashlight by the road. It couldn't be determined how long those items had been there, since Matthias had presumably not taken his medications. Pictures of him were distributed to mental institutions all over California. However, no trace of him has ever been found. His tennis shoes were inside the Forest Service trailer, which suggested to investigators that he might have taken them off to put on Weyer's leather shoes, particularly since Weyer had bigger feet, and Matthias's feet may have swollen with frostbite. But that was pure conjecture, which was all they had. State mental institutions have received a description of Matthias: slender, dark-haired, double vision without his glasses. He was not carrying his wallet when he left the house for the Chico basketball game, so we had no identification on him. If he was still alive at that point, he had been without the drugs he needed for the last 4 months. Matthias took his medicine weekly, as he had for the last 3 years. The 2 meds he took regularly were both used in the treatment of schizophrenia. His family says the illness appeared 5 years ago when he was in the army in Germany. Police records show he'd become violent on occasion. He was charged with assault twice, and there was a difficult period after his return from Germany when Matthias would fail to take his drugs and lapse into a disoriented psychosis that usually landed him at a Veterans Administration hospital. Went haywire is how Bob, his stepfather, would put it. He collected Army psychiatric disability pay, was enormously attached to his family, loved the basketball games he shared with the other 4 men, and listened to the Rolling Stones and Olivia Newton-John on the record player in the living room. His stepfather said he took the medicine the week he disappeared, but he and the doctors say Matthias had not gone haywire in 2+ years. Weyer's body was on a bed with 8 sheets wrapped around it, including the head. The autopsy showed that he had died of a combination of starvation and hypothermia. Weyer had lost nearly half of his 200 pounds. The growth of his beard suggested he had lived as long as 13 weeks from when he had last shaved. His feet were badly frostbitten, almost gangrenous. On a table next to the bed were some of Weyer's personal effects, including his wallet, still with cash, a nickel ring with Ted engraved on it, and a gold necklace he also wore. Also on the table was a gold watch without its crystal, which Weyer's family said was not his, and a partially melted candle. He was wearing a shirt and lightweight pants, but his shoes could not be found. Most puzzling to the investigators was how Weyer had come to his fate. No fire had been set in the trailer's fireplace, despite an ample supply of matches and paperback novels to use as kindling. Heavy forestry clothing, which could have kept the men warm, also remained where it had been stored. A dozen sea ration cans from a storage shed outside had been opened and their contents consumed, but a locker in the same shed that held an even greater assortment of dehydrated foods, enough to keep all 5 men fed for 1.5 years if that had been necessary, had not even been opened. Similarly, another shed nearby held a butane tank with a valve that, had it been opened, would have fed the trailer's heating system. It also seemed that Wire had not been alone in the trailer, and that Matthias and possibly Hewitt had been there with him. Matthias's shoes were there in the trailer, and the C rations had been opened with a P-38 can opener, which only Matthias and Madruga would have been familiar with from their military service. Matthias, his feet perhaps also swollen from the frostbite, could have decided to put Wire's shoes on instead if he had ventured outside. Sheets all over Wire's body also suggested that one of the others had been there with him, as his gangrenous feet would have been in too much pain for him to pull them over his body himself. Why abandon a perfectly operable car to strike out in the forest at midnight? Why press on through 20 miles of snowdrifts and darkness to break into a locked, unheated trailer just to die? Why drive all the way up there in the first place, and how? If someone chased them, why was the car undamaged? What were the whistling noises and the voices Shones heard on the road? Who was the woman holding the baby? It doesn't add up. None of it ever added up. There was some force that made him go up there, Jack Madruga's mother Mabel says firmly. They wouldn't have fled off in the wood like a bunch of quail. We know good and well that somebody made him do it. We can't visualize someone getting the upper hand on those 5 men, but we know it must have been. They seen something in that game, at that parking lot, said Ted Wire's sister-in-law. They might have seen it and didn't even realize they seen it. Even knowing that 4 of the 5 men had died in the Sierra, investigators still could not completely explain what had led to their deaths. They still had found no explanation for why the men were there, although they learned that Matthias had friends in the small town of Forbestown, and police believed that it was possible that, in an attempt to visit them on the way back home, the men may have taken a wrong turn near Oroville that put them on the mountain road. For whatever reason, the men had left the car. They had, instead of going back down the road, continued along the road in the direction they were originally going. But purposeful motion like that is not consistent at all with the circular patterns traveled by those who genuinely believe themselves lost. Whatever truly happened to those 5 men that day is still a mystery today and is undoubtedly haunting and sad. Thank you for watching this episode of The X-Files. I try to get videos out every single Saturday, but things in my life sort of put this one off a little bit. If you liked it, please leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching.